Recognizes Representative Barr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Lake, I'm sorry you've had to endure these ad hominem attacks, which are clearly designed to shift focus away from the patriotic work that you're doing to honor hardworking American taxpayers and make sure not only that you're cleaning out the corruption and, frankly, the rot within this agency, but actually advancing American national security as opposed to actively undermining it.
That's right.
And to my colleague who just asked you about Beijing and Beijing rejoicing, the reason why Beijing needs to be a focus of this conversation is we need to be asking the question, I think you just did, why is the Chinese Communist Party in charge of VOA? Why are they running VOA? Past leadership of the VOA Mandarin language service conducted annual meetings with the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C., allowing Chinese embassy officials to opine and make suggestions on VOA Mandarin language service content. Chinese Communist Party officials have also reached out to VOA hosts to convince them to be more supportive of the communist regime, and the outcomes have actually rewarded the CCP's efforts. VOA's Mandarin language service personalities have hosted events at the Chinese embassy, and one of VOA's television editors even publicly pledged his allegiance to the People's Republic of China at a Chinese embassy event. Is this correct?
This is correct. This is correct. And whistleblowers in the agency and in the Mandarin service who tried to stop that were fired or got so burned out trying to stop it, they left the job.
So, VOA also allowed communist Vietnamese and communist Chinese embassies in Washington, D.C. to pressure them into removing videos, cutting short live interviews, or changing story angles so that the coverage was more supportive of the communist governments of Hanoi and Beijing. Is this the voice of America, or is this the voice of Beijing?
Some have said it's the voice of anti-America.
Yeah, so I think that your efforts to reform the agency are vital to American national security. Why are we allowing the CCP to run the VOA newsroom while the U.S. taxpayer is on the hook for this? Are any of these VOA employees who acted on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party, are they still employed?
It's possible. We're working to try to figure that out, but unfortunately, when you do a reduction in force, it's called a RIF, and we are reducing the number of people who work at Voice of America, you can't, typical government fashion, you can't say, hey, we'd like to keep certain people because they are people who are performing well and doing a good job. You can't do that in the government. You just remove positions. And so we are shedding some of the positions, making the force lean and mean and ready to operate. And we can surge when a big story breaks. We can surge. We've got additional funding to do that by pulling back some of the funding from the grantees. We have about $17.3 million. So when we have to surge to cover something that's breaking, we can do that.
So Dan Robinson, a 34-year veteran of VOA and a former White House correspondent, here's what he wrote. I have monitored the agency's bureaucracy along with many of its reporters and concluded that it has essentially become a hubris-filled rogue operation, often reflecting leftist bias aligned with partisan national media. It has sought to avoid accountability for violations of journalistic standards and mismanagement. We've got great examples of this, even in the Oval Office. A former VOA associate editor Carol Gruensberg directed staff to, quote, avoid calling Hamas and its members terrorists. Again, this is not the voice of America. This is the voice of America's enemies. And I thank you for trying to clean up the mess. And last question, you've heard a lot of language like a vacuum and gutting and dismantling. I want you, Ms. Lake, to clear the record once and for all in this final question. Address the hysteria from the administration's critics here and clarify what is the administration's objective here. Is it to end U.S. international broadcasting, or is the goal to reform the agency so that actually is the voice of America and not the voice against America?
I believe that the goal of the administration is to reform the agency, but to eliminate, to reform our messaging, but to eliminate a corrupt agency. We don't need USAGM to get a message out, a positive pro-America message out. We can do this through other methods.
Well, deep state bias is one thing, mismanagement, corruption is one thing, but when you are actively undermining American national security, this agency needs massive reform, and I thank you for leading it.
Thank you.
Yield back.
Chair now recognizes Representative Kamlager-Dove.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member, and thank you, Ms. Lake, for joining us today. I'm deeply concerned that what the Trump administration is doing to VOA and all of the independent broadcast networks is harming the United States and serving our adversaries. It seems like everyone